Well, good afternoon. How y'all doing? Y'all hanging in there? Okay. Well, my name is Jonathan Mooney, and I'm deeply honored and privileged to be spending some time with y'all. Before I begin, just a few pieces of housekeeping, if y'all can bear with me. First and foremost, I'd love to give you a sense of how I'd like to spend our time together, if that's all right. You know, I read recently that the average human attention span is about 15 minutes, right? About 15 minutes. And then I read that the attention span of a conference goer on the day after Cinco de Mayo is about 15 seconds, right? So I'm going to really keep my speaking at you down to a manageable minimum and make sure that we end this conference opening on a high note. The other piece of housekeeping is I'm a big believer that folks have to make a learning experience their own. So I know myself that I could not sit still for even 15 seconds. So if you're like me and you need to go to the back of the room and pace while I'm talking, you need to leave the room and take a break, that's all good. You do what you need to do. I myself may wander off in the middle of my presentation. And you all will be accepting, inclusive, and accommodating of that, I'm sure, right? Okay. Third and final piece of housekeeping before I get right to it, I just want to take a moment here and thanks the good folks who made today happen. I want to thank Steve. I want to thank all the members of the planning committee. And I want to thank John. And I want to thank Marianne. Because we're here today to talk honestly about the fact that folks with cognitive and physical differences, they get the short end of the stick now, don't they? They get screwed. And this is an issue of social justice. This is an issue of civil rights. And it's only through collective action, through folks from different perspectives, whether you're a parent, a provider, or policymaker, it's only when those folks get in the room that we change things. And that's what today is about. That's what your next 3 days are about. And I want to ask everyone in this room to celebrate those folks pushing the rock up the hill a little bit, trying to send ripples of change in their own way with a big round of applause. Can y'all do that? Okay, with all that said and done, my time with y'all is pretty straightforward and pretty simple. You know, I was really asked here this morning to share with y'all my personal experience of being a young person who struggled tremendously in school. My personal journey through that institution of special education. So in the spirit of sharing that journey with y'all this morning, I want to begin by juxtaposing or comparing two very different educational realities in my life. I want to compare my early education with my higher education, and then I want to spend the rest of our time together filling in the middle between what will become apparent to you are two extremely different realities. So let me start naturally at the beginning. I grew up in and around Los Angeles, California. And when I was growing up, I was what the folks in my school community lovingly referred to as one of those kids. Anyone in the audience know any of those kids? Anyone in the audience have a classroom full of those kids? Well, that was Jonathan Mooney. You know, I was one of those kids who had such a hard time sitting still in elementary school that I grew up chilling out with the janitor in the hallway, right? I was one of those kids who had such a hard time keeping his mouth shut in middle school that I grew up on a first-name basis with Shirley, the receptionist, in the principal's office, right? And in high school, I was one of those kids who had such a hard time learning to read, and specifically a torturous time reading out loud, that I spent most of my high school experience hiding in the bathroom to escape reading out loud with tears streaming down my face. I did not learn to read until I was 12 years old. Couldn't read until I was 12. I was labeled or diagnosed with dyslexia in 4th grade. I was labeled with ADHD, which stands for Attention Deficit Hyperactivity Disorder, in 5th grade. And I dropped out of school for a year in sixth grade. That year when I left school, I had a number of mental health challenges. I was diagnosed with anxiety. I was diagnosed with school phobia. And I was diagnosed with clinical depression. And I had the first of, unfortunately, what would be a few plans for suicide. I spent about 2 years in and out of traditional education, homeschool, alternative school placements. And when I finally re-enrolled in a stable school, on my first day of ninth grade, a guidance counselor called me into his office and said, Jonathan, I give you a 50-50 chance of graduating from high school. People like you, Jonathan, usually end up flipping burgers for a living. That's what happens to people like you. When I was 18 and I had graduated from high school, pretty much as an athlete, I'll be honest with y'all, if it wasn't for being good at soccer, I would be a dropout today. If it wasn't for being good at something, I wouldn't be alive today. But when I graduated at 18, the same guy who told me I would flip burgers for a living, he called me into his office and said, Jonathan, you would be lucky to flip burgers because people like you usually end up in jail. So that was the beginning of my educational journey. Now, if you all will bear with me, let me fast forward to the end of that journey because it goes without saying that neither one of those very hopeful prophecies came to pass in my life or in my education. Opposed to flipping burgers, I ended up a graduate of Brown University, which you may or may not know is an Ivy League university. I graduated from Brown with an honors degree in, of all things, English literature, right? Opposed to being incarcerated, as was predicted for me, I ended up the author of 2 books, the first of which I wrote at the age of 21 as an undergraduate at Brown University. So I have done many, many things in my brief life. I have gone to and graduated from college. I've authored books. I've founded a nonprofit organization, lectured in 50 states and 5 countries. I have done many, many things in my life, with the exception of flipping burgers or being incarcerated, right? Now, my job with y'all today is to fill in the middle between those 2 extremes. My job today is to answer the very valid and honest question that I'm asked all the time when people hear about such a profound journey of personal and academic transformation. I'm asked all the time by moms and dads and providers and teachers, Jonathan, how did you do it, right? How could you go from a 6th grade dropout who could not read at 12 years old to a published Ivy League English major? How did you do that, Jonathan? What drugs did you take? And where can I buy some, right? Hey, I know that is the question on your mind today, and I want to explore that question with you. But perhaps more important than answering that question as it pertains to me, I want to interrogate the assumption underneath that question. Because often, what folks mean by that question is, Jonathan, how'd you fix yourself? There's an assumption in our culture and in our institutions that for people with cognitive and physical differences to live valuable and meaningful lives, they have to cease being different. They got to fix themselves, or they have to change. And that assumption has driven so much of the work that we do, whether it be consciously or unconsciously, whether it be as educators or parents or policymakers. That assumption that people with differences are broken or defective has colored our work. And it's an assumption that I think we're here today collectively trying to reimagine and to think beyond and to think about what comes next. Because I know in my life, it wasn't that deficit pathology paradigm that facilitated change for me. You know, I went to Brown University, studied English literature, and I read in the 12th percentile. Didn't cure my dyslexia. You know, I've authored 2 books, and I spell at a 3rd grade level. Didn't fix that part of myself. You know, I founded a national nonprofit organization. It has 49 chapters in 29 states, and I have the attention span of a gnat, okay? Didn't fix the ADD those things were differences in my life. They're not something to be ashamed of. They're not something to wish away. They're something to celebrate. I want us to talk about a diversity model today of how we think about these different brains and different bodies as valuable to society, as important, as having an intrinsic human dignity that we all can learn from. So that's how I want to spend my time with you all today. And that was the foundation of my journey of change. That message from my parents, that message from the educators and professionals, and that message brought to life in systems by the policymakers. So I want to share with you really three things that I think help us down this road, can spark dialogue and be a catalyst for conversation to reimagine not just how we act, but how we think when it comes to folks with these differences. So I want to share these things with you, and then we'll call it a morning. So first and foremost, when I think about that reimagining of how we conceptualize disability, how we conceptualize difference, that reimagining starts with understanding that people don't have disabilities. No, they have differences that become disabled by the environments they find themselves in. And that is a subtle but important and powerful paradigm shift. And that was the center of my own journey. You know, folks come to my experience and they assume that my disability was ADD, right? It's an executive function problem, and that was my disability. No, ADD wasn't my disability. It's a difference. My disability was the way I was treated because of that difference. When I think about my life, the disabling experience was being told that because of a difference, I was the crazy or bad kid. That was a message I got every day because of the difference of ADD in school. And it started early, on the first day of school. No joke. Never forget. I went to a half-day kindergarten program, right? Went to school for 4 hours. My mother dropped me off at 8:30. She picked me up at 12:30. And when she picked me up, I got in that car and I said to my mom, "Mom, why am I the bad kid? I have been in school for 4 hours." Never said that before, but said it that day. Where did that come from? I had the same brain in preschool. It wasn't the brain that changed. It was the environment that changed. On that day, I met something that terrifies me to this day. And it's called the school desk, right? Let me immerse you into my relationship with that school desk for a moment, right? And it is a fraught relationship, now isn't it? This is first grade, this is 12th grade, this is Brown University, this is tonight if I was having dinner with y'all, right? I see that desk, and I see that chair, and before I even sit in it, my hands start to sweat, right? My face gets all red, because I know after 5 seconds at that desk, the foot's gonna start bouncing, right? 10 seconds at the desk, both feet start bouncing. 15 seconds at that desk, oh, I'm gonna bust out those drums, right? 15 minutes at the desk, it's all over. I'm the kid trying to take my leg and put it behind my neck, right? And that young person is shamed, you know, because we often assume that the non-compliant kid is the problem kid. So that's what I heard. You know, I heard it from home. I'll be honest with you. I heard it from my dad sometimes. I grew up in a good old school Irish Catholic household. And at the dinner table, guess what? The good kid sat still. So I heard from my dad, "Jonathan, what's wrong with you?" And the same thing happened in my classrooms. Not all of them, but some of them. I'll never forget, I had this teacher in second grade named Mrs. C. I've had many, many gifted, brilliant teachers who I will celebrate with y'all today. Mrs. C is not one of those, okay? My foot would be bouncing, and she would stop class, and she would point at me, and she would say at the top of her lungs, "Jonathan, what is your problem?" If I had a nickel for every time I heard, "What's your problem?" be a rich man today. But my problem wasn't ADD. ADD is a difference. It has pros and it has cons. In some environments, ADD is an asset. You go to Wall Street and they call it multitasking, right? There's research that shows that emergency medical professionals with that difference have better job performance ratings than the so-called normal firemen or firewoman. And that makes sense. Your house is on fire. You want that dude to have ADD, right? Come on now. ADD wasn't the problem. The problem was in the environment. The problem was the idea that the good kid is the compliant kid, which is a cultural norm. The problem was how I was treated. That was the problem. Because, it didn't just stop with the rhetoric of me having a problem. Eventually, I would find myself in one of the many places where the bad kids go, where I would develop the social identity of being the problem kid. Where do the bad kids go in school? Let's hear them all. I collect all these stories, right? Hallway, principal's office, in-school suspension. Anybody grow up going to Catholic school in the audience by any chance? Okay, we're going to have a separate session when we're all done, right? We're going to have a breakout room 105 called Nuns with Rulers, right? I'm a good old Irish Catholic. I know all about it. Let me tell you all my favorite bad kid story because it embodies the way that it's not the brain that's the problem. It's the way we treat the brain that's the problem. My favorite bad kid story comes from Green Bay, Wisconsin. And I was there some time ago, about 3 years ago, observing third grade classrooms. And I entered this one third grade classroom. And when I entered, I could see from the front of the room, in the back of the room, a set of boxes made out of bookshelves about 3 feet tall. They had taken some bookshelves and made a box about this big. And in the box, I could see a head bouncing up and down. It was one of the third graders in the box jumping, right? Now, that was a sight that I wasn't used to seeing every day. So I turned to the teacher, and with all due respect, I said to him, "What's up with the box, man? What's going on?" The guy looked at me with a straight face, never forget it, straight face. And he said, "Jonathan, that's Jack." I said, "You have a Jack in the box? Are you kidding me?" Poor little Jack. Back of the room in the box. Jack's brain wasn't the problem. The box was the problem. The way he was treated was the problem. People don't have disability. They have differences. They experience disability in the environments we create. Dyslexia wasn't my disability. A lot of people assume it was. They assume that, hey, man, if you can't read, that must be a big problem in your life. But much like ADD, dyslexia is value neutral. There are good and there are bad components of it. My problem was the way I was made to feel, the way I believed I was dumb because of the difference. And that was a message I got all the time in school because we have a very narrow definition of intelligence that leaves so many young people out. We think that the smart kid is the academic kid. And we think that the smart kid is the kid who reads well, right? And because we've so doubled down on that definition, so many young people are being disabled by that narrow definition of intelligence. And it's in school, certainly, but we got to be honest that that's in our culture, isn't it? I'm the father of 3. I got 3 little ones. And my oldest, Max, he's 6 years old. And he's in kindergarten. And as you can imagine, I spend a lot of time with moms and dads of other kids Max's age. And every time I'm hanging out with those moms and dads of 6-year-olds, all I'm ever hearing is how smart their kids are, right? Everyone's got a genius on their hands in Santa Monica, California, right? And how do they know that they got baby Einstein at home? How do they know it? It's always about one thing. It's always about the reading. Narrow definition of what it means to be smart. I hear this all the time. I hear, oh, my kid's so smart. They're reading chapter books and they're in preschool. Oh, my kid's so smart. They know all their letters and they're 3 years old. Oh, my kid's so smart. They know phonics and they're in utero. All right? Hey, I ain't never hearing my kids so smart they're good at talking or building or connecting or being a moral person. I don't hear that. I hear a narrow definition of intelligence, and it was the institutionalizing of that definition that was my disability, not dyslexia. It was the message that I got that I was the dumb kid that I really struggled with. It was the fact that I found myself in the stupid track because of that difference that disabled me. Who remembers the stupid group from they were growing up? Anybody? Let me ask the question differently. Who remembers reading groups from when they were growing up? Let me ask y'all a question. Was it ever hard to tell which reading group was the smart reading group and which reading group was the dumb reading group? Not hard to tell, right? You had the blackbirds over here. You have the bluebirds over here. And then over in the annexed trailer building, you had the sparrows, right? We all knew the smart group and the stupid group. Let me put it this way. When I was growing up, I knew that my group was the dumb group because my group was a bird that did not fly, okay? It was an ostrich and it ran quickly, right? And I was hanging out with C-Spot Run and the condors were reading War and Peace, okay? Dyslexia wasn't my disability. It was the belief that I was the dumb kid. The message I got that I was less valuable because of a difference. Disability isn't in bodies and minds, it's in the interaction of bodies and minds and context and environment. And that's a profound insight that should shape and lead this field forward. We can redefine environments. We can create experiences that have a broader definition of normal. And we can help people not feel less than. Give you one of the best examples I've seen of that, how malleable ability is, how we enable or disable based on the choices that we make. You know, I'm writing this new book about this idea of neurodiversity, and in writing this book, I learned about this computer programming, software design firm in Silicon Valley. And what made this firm unique was that they only hired computer programmers with autism or Asperger's. That was it. This wasn't a charity. This was a business. They believed that that brain that other people have derided as less than was valuable. They believed that that brain had strengths that they needed, and that makes some sense, right? I know that brain has strengths I never have. Often good systems thinkers, often good with numbers. And let's be honest, those folks are often better, more productive employees. Don't waste a lot of time on chit-chat, all right? Not a lot of office cooler politics, right? Do some programming, you know? So I was intrigued by this business that said, you know what other people see as disability, we see as ability. And we're gonna run with that. So I went to go visit them. And they were generous, and they gave me a tour, and I learned all about how they reimagined the environment to scale what's right with those folks. And at the end of my time with them, they were generous enough to host a cocktail party, a reception. And let me tell you, if you have not been to a cocktail party with 200 computer programmers with Asperger's and autism, you have not lived, okay? So I'm hanging out, you know, having a good time. And about halfway through, I joined some of the programmers at a table. And they were talking amongst themselves. And the moment I joined the table, the conversation went dead silent. Dead silent. And I could tell that they had been talking about me, right? Y'all been there, you know. You can tell when somebody's talking about you, right? So I turned to one of the programmers, and I said, hey, man, what were y'all saying about me? What do you think about me? You know, I'm here to learn, and I'm curious. And he said, oh, nothing, don't worry about it. And then I knew that they were talking about me, right? So I said, hey, man, it's all good. Just what do y'all think? And he looked at me, and he said, well, we think you're weird. And you know what? In their normal, I was. It's the interaction of difference and context where people experience disability or ability. And there's hope in that. Because it doesn't mean it's a kid problem, it's a classroom problem. It doesn't mean it's a person problem, it's a policy problem. It means that we can reimagine how we engage folks, how we treat folks. And we can build ramps and expand the environments that people live and work in and learn in. Because we ain't ever going to fix people, but we can fix the decisions we make. We can fix the classrooms we build. And that is the foundation of this conversation of reimagining our experience and our work through a diversity paradigm. But there's another step for that reimagining. And that other step is really embodied by my mother, embodied by my mom. And I want to share a little bit about my mom with you because I was so inspired by Marianne and her work and the work of all the moms and dads and caregivers and grandfathers and grandmothers in this room. You know, my mother, a lot of people didn't take her seriously. My mom was dismissed by many professionals in my life. And she was dismissed for multiple reasons. My mother was dismissed because she wasn't a tall woman, right? On a good day, in high heels, my mother was 4'11", right? Little Irish bulldog, my mom. My mother was dismissed because she wasn't a wealthy woman. She raised my brother and 2 sisters on welfare in San Francisco. And my mom was dismissed because she wasn't an educated woman either. You know, she never went to college. My mom was most likely undiagnosed dyslexic, struggled in school, had low expectations surround her entire life. And my mom was also dismissed because she had a funny voice. She had a very high-pitched, squeaky voice like Mickey Mouse, right? So folks didn't take her seriously, but they dismissed her at their own peril, right? Because, yeah, she wasn't tall, fine. She wasn't educated, sure. She wasn't wealthy, and she sounded like Mickey Mouse, but my mother, my mom, she cursed like a truck driver. And let me ask y'all a question. If you were a principal or a teacher or a social worker not doing right by Jonathan Mooney, did you want cursing Mickey Mouse in your office? The answer to that, if you're at all confused, is no, okay? Well, guess where my mom was? Every single day when things were going wrong for her son. She was in that office. How did we know she was in that office? Because every dog in the neighborhood was running away. My mother understood that she had to fight for me. But more important than that, my mother understood that this fight, while on one hand is a fight for services, it is a fight for resources, she understood this as a more important fight and bigger fight. This was a fight for social justice. You know, people with disabilities have the highest unemployment rate out of any group in this country. People with cognitive and physical differences have the highest incarceration rates out of any group in this country and the lowest high school graduation rates out of any group in this country. This is a civil rights issue. My mother understood that. My mom understood that it wasn't okay for me to ride the last form of federally funded segregated transportation called the short bus to school. My mother understood that when I heard the word retard on the playground, which I heard almost every single day, that word was the moral equivalent of a racial slur and should be treated that way by the principal, by the community, by the other parents. My mom understood that I needed somebody to fight for me and to fight for my rights as a cognitive and physical minority, and to adopt that rights-based paradigm and make it central to every single thing she did. And I'm here today because I learned to fight for myself in that respect. You know, one of the deep challenges when we think about reimagining the work that we do is we have been in a patient model, right? Folks have been disempowered in that model. Do you all know the Greek root for the word patient is to be flat on your back? It's the weakest place a human being can be. It robs folks of inherent human dignity. It robs folks of intrinsic agency. We got to get that back. We don't want patients. We want agents. We don't want clients. We want self-advocates. We want folks who own this experience and fight for it. My mother understood and instilled in me that my journey forward wasn't going to be about having people fix me, but finding people who would fight with me and fight for me. And you all and this field and this group are the next generation of those fighters. And you do that every day. And you adopt that rights-based paradigm. Now, there's one more element to this paradigm shift we've been talking about, right? Another element for my journey of change. Away from people having disabilities to experiencing it. Away from patient to agent. And last but not least, something we have heard in John and Marianne, something you all believe deeply, I know, is a shift from this deficit model to an asset-based strength model. Because we aren't seeing young people through the lens of their strengths, gifts, and talents. And I know how hard that can be sometimes when we've been in academic settings that hand over the diagnostic statistical manual to you and catalog all the things that's wrong with folks. I know how hard it is to look past that history of deficits, but we have to do it because it's that where we change lives. One of the first young people I ever worked with when I was on my road to being an advocate for folks who learn and live differently was this young man named Robert. And I met Robert in a segregated special ed classroom on the south side of Providence. And Robert had what the state of Rhode Island used at the time, and I think of is an outdated, antiquated way to view Robert, but nonetheless, it was their language. He had what they called mental retardation. He was mentally retarded. But just that language right there negated Robert's mind. It blinded people to all of the things that Robert had. And I remember that first day that I met Robert and spent time with Robert. And on that first morning, when I entered into his classroom, I watched Robert go around to every one of his classmates and give him a hug. Robert did that every day, every period. Robert wasn't mentally retarded. Robert had the emotional intelligence of Jesus, right? Robert had the spiritual IQ of Gandhi, but we missed it because we were looking at it through the lens of his deficits. We were blinded to it. And we have to resist that, right? We have to find out a way to presume competence, right? Because more and more people who find success in life aren't people who get good at something. They're people who just get good at one thing, right? And that's their path forward. You know, I write books for a living, and I struggle with spelling. And I studied English literature, and I struggle with reading. How do I do that? Did I fix my weaknesses? No. You know what I did? I married my spell checker, right? It's called strategic mating, and if you haven't tried it, you all should try it, right? It's a paradigm shift from remediation to accommodation, from supporting folks opposed to demanding that they change. It's a paradigm shift that tries to map the strengths, gifts, and talents, and it's a paradigm shift that presumes every single person, no matter their challenges, no matter their weaknesses, has a strength that you can scale, have a gift that you can find. You know, one of the most profound people in my life, an educator, was a man who presumed competence. And that presumption of competence changed my life. His name was Father Young. And I met Father Young at the university I went to before Brown, a place called Loyola Marymount University. And I went to LMU on soccer scholarship. Dumb jock. I was the stupid kid. I wanted nothing to do with my learning because I thought I couldn't. And on my first day of school at LMU, the soccer coach made us go around and figure out what we were going to major in. And I could care less. I went to the different departments and I didn't listen to a word until I got to the English department. And the chair of the department, Father Young, Shakespeare scholar, Jesuit priest, was up on that stage talking about literature and ideas like his head was on fire, right? And he inspired me. And I went up to him afterwards. And I said, Father Young, you inspired me, man. I think I'm going to study English literature here at LMU. But, I said to him, I'm dyslexic. I don't read well. I don't write well. I don't spell well. I don't know if I can do it. Father Young looked right at me. No one ever said this before. He said, son, you're using that as an excuse. I believe you can do this. John Irving, one of the most famous American authors in the world, is dyslexic. If he can do it, you can do it. W.B. Yeats couldn't spell to save his life. If he could do it, you could do it. I believe in you. We'll do it differently, he said to me. He said, Jonathan, you can get technology to help you with writing and spelling, but you can never get a technology to help you think, and I believe you have a mind in there. And I'm going to help you find that mind. He inspired me. You know, folks had lowered the bar my whole life. He raised the bar. There was a soft bigotry of low expectations that surrounded me my entire life, and he said no. He said, I won't have it. So I left that guy's office, and as you can imagine, I was on cloud nine, right? I went over to the dean of academic enrollment, and I sat across from this guy, and I said, I'm going to study me some English literature, right? It is on, right? Let's do it. And that guy pulled out my file, right? Y'all know the file, right? Hey, let's be honest. KGB's got nothing on the IEP, right? Like, they've been doing some deep intel on me for my entire life, right? And it ain't good news in that file. So he pulls this file out, and he starts flipping through it. And he laughs. He laughs. He says, English literature? You can't spell? You can't read? You can't write? English literature? No way. I won't approve this major. He said to me, you should consider something less intellectual. So I left that guy's office. Never forget, what you say to people matters. I was 19. I believed it. And I left that guy's office, and I went back to Father Young, and I said, Father Young, don't worry about the piece of paper that I asked you to sign, because I'm not going to study literature here at LMU. And he said, why? And I told him. I said, that guy thinks I can't do it because of my disability. And Father Young looked right at me, and he said in a way that only an old school Jesuit can. He said, well, son, I guess you're just going to have to prove that bastard wrong. And the next day, I enrolled in 4 English literature classes. And needless to say, the guy who told me I should consider something less intellectual, well, let's just say that guy has an autographed copy of both of my books on his desk right now, right? It's that presumption of competence. You know, we lose kids in the alphabet soup. We lose kids in the diagnosis. We lose kids in the documentation. But you all did not get into this business for a label. You got into this business for a child, an adult, a human being. You got in it for a person. And when we see people through the lens of what's wrong with them, we demoralize them as human beings. And there's no path forward. And the path forward is to see them through the lens of what's right with them. And there was not a young person in your caseload. There was not a young person in your classroom. There was not a young person in your community or your practice that doesn't have a strength, gift, and talent that you can build, that you can scale. There's a kid in the hallway right now that can become a CEO in the boardroom if we celebrate that. There's a kid on the short bus right now that can become a culinary artist if we build on that. There's a strength and talent in every one of these people that people can build a life on. Find it, nurture it, celebrate it. I believe that so deeply. You know, I learned that not only in my own journey, I learned that from a young man named Juan. I'll tell you about him, because often talent is missed because it's misapplied. I met Juan when I was working in South LA as a community organizer. And Juan had been arrested when he was 15 years old for running a 50-person drug ring in South LA. And he was a serious narcotics dealer. And he went to jail, and he served his time, and he wanted to do something different with his life. And he came to our meeting and said, I want to change, but I'm dumb. He grew up in special ed, Juan. Couldn't read, couldn't write. He said, I'm not good at anything. I looked right at Juan and said, not good at anything? 25-person drug ring? I said, you're an entrepreneur, brother. Now, look, I was honest with Juan. I said, Juan, we got to get you a different product, right? We got to get you some stocks or some sneakers or some hoodies or something to sell, man. But hey, we could work with that, brother. And Juan enrolled in a small business development course. Juan enrolled in a graphic design course. He doesn't read well, he doesn't write well, but he hustles well. He draws well, he designs well, and he created his own small business. He created a graphic design firm that works with advertising agencies to market products to urban neighborhoods. And Juan became the first in his family to earn a living wage. Not because we remediated his weakness, but we scaled his strength. Not because we focused on what was wrong with him, but we scaled what was right with him. And that's the future of y'all's work. Embedded in this paradigm shift, that folks with differences are valuable. They're valuable and intrinsically of importance, and they're valuable for what they can contribute to our culture and our schools and our society. And at the heart of this work, because I want to conclude now, is a profound challenge that you all are leading the way on to our narrow and rigid definitions of normal. That is robbing each and every one of us, whether we have labels or not, and our children, whether they have labels or not, of an authentic, singular life. This myth that there's a body we all should have. This myth that there's a mind we all should aspire to. And I want to end my time with y'all with a quick story about how challenging, not disability, but normalcy changes a life and is the future of your work. This story comes from a nonprofit I founded in my dorm room at Brown called YAI. And it's a very simple nonprofit organization that's all around the country now that takes adults with cognitive and physical differences and it matches them with younger people who have similar challenges to give them hope, as John said, for a positive future that things get better. They're not alone. When we started YAI, there was only 5 of us, right? Not 5 states, not 5 chapters. There were 5 Brown students, 5 third graders in a room talking about being different. But one group, one pair, didn't want to be with the larger group. And they went over to the other side of the room. The Brown student in that group, his name was Kent Roberts. And Kent Roberts is a dear friend of mine. So when I say this, it is a compliment of the highest order. Kent Roberts was, and still is, a complete freak show, okay? He had a big beard down to here. He had long hair down to his waist. The dude totally looked like Jesus, right? Totally looked like Jesus. Every label under the sun, grew up in special education, made it to Brown, a role model for others. And then the kid he was working with was a young man named Philip. And Philip was a hurting kid. Philip was in special ed. He had every label you could imagine, from autism, Asperger's, ADD. And he was so terrified of school that he would rub his left eyebrow raw. So when I met Philip, he had no left eyebrow, an anxiety tick. So they were quite a sight to see, right? You had Jesus-looking Kent over here, and you got hurting Philip. And they didn't want to share, and they went to the other side of the room, which was good, fine. And about halfway through our time together, I left the young man I was working with, Robert, who I told you about, and I went over to Kent and Philip's group to listen. And when I got to Kent and Philip's group, I heard Kent, who's usually fairly soft-spoken, screaming at the top of his lungs at Philip. And he was yelling, Philip, if you learn one thing in Project YAI, you have to learn that normal people suck, Philip. They suck. I mean, like, that's not what Jesus says, man. I mean, come on now. I am in a public elementary school. I think the cops are coming next, right? I wanted to do Project YAI as my profession upon graduation, and there is no federal funding for an organization whose mission is to curse at children, right? So I go home that night, and I'm angry. I'm angry at Kent. I think he's ruined this thing that I wanted to do for my life. So I call him on the phone, and I yell at him. I yell at him for about 10 minutes. Why did you say that? How could you say that? What were you thinking? Kent doesn't say a word. until the very end of the call. All he says is, "It's true," and hangs up the phone, right? So I'm thinking maybe, just maybe, water under the bridge, right? No teacher heard it, no principal was present, under the rug, Wrong. I get a call the next morning from the principal of the Fox Point Elementary School, Principal Mary Brennan. And Principal Mary Brennan respectfully summons me to her office to discuss what transpired the day before at YAI. So I drive to her office, and I'm thinking of all the ways I can apologize for scarring this third grader, right? And to confirm my fears, when I get to the office, not only is it Principal Mary Brennan, but it's also Philip's grandma. He lives full-time with grandma. And if I've learned one thing in my brief life, it is do not mess with grandma, right? Don't do it, because before I even sit down, Philip's grandmother stands up and she points at me and she says, "What did you do to my grandson?" I said, "Nothing. It was that Kent guy, Look, Jesus or not, right under the bus, I didn't do it. That guy, right there. Philip's grandma had tears in her eyes. She said, "Jonathan, for 3 years, from our home to school, my grandson's been in tears, begging me to turn around and go back. Every morning, Jonathan, my grandson hides under the bed and says, 'Don't make me go to school.' But today," she said, "the day after Project Eye to Eye, my grandson was up early, waiting in the car, ready to go to school. What did you do to my grandson?" I looked at her and I said, "Well, it was my good friend, Kent Roberts. Best buddies in the world right here. And it wasn't me. It was Kent." For the first time in Philip's life, Kent told him he wasn't broken. And that's your work. It is a profoundly demoralizing experience to be told that you're a defective human being, to hear that you are broken, that you aren't valuable. And you all are about challenging that. And you're also about challenging a broader culture that has turned every difference into a disease. You're about challenging a larger paradigm that has so narrowed our definition of normal, it leaves so many people with and without differences out. You all are about challenging that culture. Because the only normal people are people you don't know very well, right? You all are in the middle, are the vanguard of a profound civil rights movement. A profound civil rights movement for those in the hallway and on the short bus and in institutionalized care, but you are on the vanguard of a profound civil rights movement that's fighting for everybody's right to be different. You're fighting to create a culture where different isn't deficient. You're fighting to create a culture that celebrates people not despite their differences, but for their differences. And you're fighting to create a culture that sees, paradoxically, that difference is the norm. Thank you all very much for listening to me speak. I really appreciate it.